Quick one before we start. Massive thank you to everyone who's been listening and sharing Rev-n-u Unplugged. Your support means everything. If you haven't already, please hit like, follow, and if you can, subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming up. Right, let's get into today's show. Today's guest has surveyed over 200 B2B tech businesses. He's been CEO twice, sold to PE, and he doesn't do corporate waffle. James Bagan tells it straight. In this episode, he tells us why some investors see RevOps as a walking overhead, why promoting your best salesperson to sales manager creates two problems, and the question every new CRO should ask: when does all of this become my fault? We're covering the first 30 to 90 days as a CRO, why growth at all costs is dead, and how to manage board expectations, and why conventional interviewing is about as reliable as selecting candidates by star sign. Plus, James shares why you should never stop recruiting, even when fully staffed. This is the conversation every sales leader needs to hear. So grab a brew, settle in, and let's get into it. This is Rev-n-u Unplugged with James Bagan. James, welcome to Rev-n-u Unplugged. It's a delight to have you on the show. Super excited to get some insight from you from the vast experience you have as a sales leader. Before we get going, I always ask the guests just to give us a bit of background on themselves so our viewers know exactly who you are.
Sure, and first of all, James, names are going to be easy today, aren't they? My name is James Bagan. I do a whole host of different things these days, James, but at my core, stock and trade is sales. I've been a B2B technology sales guy since the mid-90s, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. It's over 30 years that I've been trying to persuade people to part with their money, but I've been very fortunate in that I've also been CEO of a technology or a couple of technology businesses which I've sold for private equity, one in 2006 and one in 2010. And since 2012, I've been doing advisory work, GTM advisory work for funds, mid-market, low mid-market, private equity and venture capital here in the UK. Quite a bit of investing through VCTs. And today, other than that, the advisory and the investing piece, I chair 3 B2B technology businesses. I've also been lucky enough as chair to see another 3 exits for technology businesses that I've been part of. And I also provide a go-to-market due diligence service for funds. So that means going into sales and marketing operations, commercial operations, and making an objective appraisal of those departments, those functions for proposed investments. And since 2012, James, I've surveyed over 200 businesses. So I've got a pretty broad perspective on what good, bad, and indifferent looks like from a GTM.
100%. Digging into your time as a CEO and also everything that you've been doing since then puts you in a pretty strong place to have a pretty good opinion on what good looks like, what great looks like, and what you've seen where it hasn't quite worked out. Now, today, we're covering a number of topics. We're going to be looking at RevOps. We're going to be looking particularly areas around where you're coaching CROs and patterns that you've seen in there. We're going to be looking at communication with the board. One of the bits I really enjoyed talking to you was about the first 30 to 90 days of a CRO and what to look at on that side of things. So much to dive into. We're going to start with RevOps. And one of the bits we spoke about when we were planning this session is that there can be, and I see it a lot as well, where the board and the management aren't necessarily as bought into RevOps or see RevOps as the jewel in the chest they might well be. First of all, why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think it's one answer, James, first of all. I think different people have different perspectives. So first of all, nice and easy answer. I think for a lot of boards, it's simply a lack of experience with this. It's just something that they haven't come across before. I did a little bit of work earlier in the year, James, on some RevOps events actually, and I was able to find that the term RevOps was first used by an organisation called Lean Data around sort of 2016. So So it's in business terms, it's a relatively new role, and I think also so some people just haven't had any experience of it. I think also there is a little bit of plurality in how it's defined. So you've almost certainly seen this. I've seen this. Is that my understanding or my definition of RevOps will be slightly different from yours and be slightly different from the next person. If you're a new business salesperson, it's relatively straightforward, isn't it? The remit, the purview of the role. Whereas I think RevOps is a little bit, or has been a little bit more nebulous as the role has started to become established. So that I think immediately puts people at ill at ease as to what it is and what the value can be, what the value provided is. But I think the main reason, James, actually is this, which is that for boards and investors, what they want is they want to draw with sales, or revenue. They want to draw a direct line between effort and output, and the easiest way to do that is hire a salesperson with a target, clearly. And I've actually heard, not recently, I must admit, but I've actually heard somebody describe, a RevOps role as a walking overhead. And, it's quite disparaging, actually. As I said, not heard it recently, but there's a sense almost that it's a luxury item. You know what I mean? It's something that you go in to fluff out the commercial operation, and the fact that we're talking about this is you can reasonably infer that I don't think that's the case. And so I've been on a little bit of a mission recently to try to change that perception that it is an optional extra. It's actually something much more fundamental.
We've seen in our business, we've done the growth in the number of roles, RevOps roles, particularly within the larger PE portfolio firms, has gone through the roof this year. And I think there's been a big learning curve of exactly what RevOps is and what skill sets you need to actually be able to do a RevOps role. To go into the detail around this, when we were talking before, that you mentioned not waiting for 20 plus salespeople before implementing RevOps. What's the earliest stage you've seen RevOps add genuine value, and what changes about the role of the company when it goes from sort of like 5 to 50 to 500 people? So there's kind of two questions in one there. Where's the value in the earliest that you've seen it, and then how does it change?
So I think, I don't think I've seen it in startups, but then I have to be honest here, or certainly provide some context, James. I tend not to work with startups, so that's an area of the market or an end of the market that's not subject matter expertise at all. But I couldn't sit here and point my finger at a business that's got two co-founders, a product evangelist, and then a RevOps person. That's rare, I would say. But I am seeing more and more that the scale-ups that I work with, and these businesses can be relatively small in business terms. So we're talking about 2 or 3 million ARR, not huge sums by any means. But I'm seeing those having RevOps people of a certain profile more and more, most definitely. Look, the other thing I would say here is that I don't think this is a hard and fast answer. I think that there is some nuance here. I think people can, or businesses can make slightly different judgments as to when it's the right moment for them. I wouldn't be carte blanche on this. But I think there are some indicators, James. I think there are some indicators that would catalyse a conversation at management or board level as to whether it's now right for us to consider the role. And in no particular order, they would be things like customer journey complexity, multiple products or value propositions going into multiple sectors. So you're starting to get layers, you're starting to get differentiated detail across different product lines, different sales motions. So I can certainly think about some businesses, small businesses I work with, where they've got direct sales, they've got indirect sales, they've got customer expansion, they've got public sector markets, they've got private sector markets, they've got different geographical jurisdictions as well. So do you see what I mean? You're starting to get lots of different moving parts in there, and I think getting that untangled is can be hard work for those businesses that don't have RevOps. And then I would say probably where there is a need for greater efficiencies or alignments. So you've got we'll probably talk about this, but you've got different commercial functions not working harmoniously, and I think where those kind of issues arise, then the question of RevOps definitely comes up. And then perhaps the final one I would say is the one that perhaps catalyses it more than anything else is investment, because I've seen this really recently actually, where I'm doing the DD on a potential investment, and I can see plain as day that they're not ready, they're not equipped to be able to meet the reporting or data reporting obligations that are about to hit them when the investor joins the board. And as you well know, when somebody puts 5, 10, 15, whatever it is, million pounds into your business, they're going to be asking some very difficult questions, very detailed questions on a regular basis, and that can be overwhelming for a CRO or for the commercial team. So I'm constantly advocating to people that if you haven't got that set up, you've got data, but you haven't got that reporting framework set up, then now would be a really good time to consider hiring somebody sensible into that role.
I think the data side of it is a good part to for us to dive into. In particularly this year alone, we'll probably see, and you're probably closer to it than I am, but if we just put a rough stab in that, around about 50% of SaaS companies will not hit target. They won't hit what they forecast. How does a RevOps person help you to put a forecast together, which is probably more aligned to what the business is capable of doing?
Well, I think that there's a couple of answers here, because there's the sort of the systemic side, the process that the RevOps person applies, but then there's also the character set of the individual who's fulfilling the role, and also the import that the rest of the business gives the role. Because, so starting with the last one first, too often that I see RevOps people being relegated to data jockey type level, and they're the person who's really good on Salesforce, they're the person who can do the dashboards or the reporting. And I think, to your question, if you want a really defensible, robust forecast, that requires a different kind of person with a different sort of level of gravitas and confidence and probably experience as well. Somebody who's prepared to not just stand toe to toe with salespeople who, I've been one, who's going to tell you exactly what I want to tell you and nothing more, but also doing the same thing with the CRO and the board. Where, again, this will be something that's familiar to you, and it's definitely happening right now everywhere in the market. Boards and senior teams, C-suites are pushing for really punchy numbers. And I've made this mistake several times in my career that I felt I haven't had the maturity or the confidence to be able to stand my ground and say to the people more senior than me, no, I can't sign up to that number, I can't put my name on that number, we're not going to be able to achieve it. Having a really strategic, having a really confident RevOps person who not only can evidence the fact that a forecast may or may not be achievable with data, but also then has the mindset to be able to communicate something which could be, well, almost certainly be a very difficult, very awkward conversation, wouldn't it be? I mean, if you saying to somebody, look, I don't think we can deliver that number, there are going to be ramifications from that, and it can be tough.
But it definitely helps when you've got, because data doesn't lie. And when you've got story and information behind that data, it makes that conversation much easier, because in the past, we'll see sales leaders that just have to say yes. The board and the management are saying, this is how much we need to grow by next year. So for us to be able to grow by that, you need to stop churn and you need to add X amount of new logos into the business. And by doing that, we hit the number we're looking for. But now you can actually have clear indicators of whether the business is actually capable of doing it. It kind of makes that conversation much easier to have, as long as you understand what the data is telling you, and also how you can affect the data to move it in the direction you want to. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree, but I think, isn't that where the magic is? Because I think most modern B2B businesses have got plenty of data. Data is being generated at an exponential rate across multiple different sources, multiple different channels. So that when I go into businesses, do my diagnostics or do my DD work, James, I don't hear people saying we haven't got data. What they're saying often is we've got too much. There's a multiplicity of data sources. It's not deduped, it's not enriched, it's not augmented, it's not validated or verified. And so often what you find, and this is kind of the sort of RevOps maturity model, when they're coming in initially, the first piece of work they tend to do is that sort of data management piece, which is about assessing what the data estate is and taking out the crap and leaving ourselves with the gold, and getting that into a usable format, getting that into a repository or a database, which allows us then to be able to apply our analysis on top and draw insights from that. So I agree with you that the data doesn't lie, except that it has to be accurate, it has to be current, and it has to be in a usable format. And so often what you find is that, as I say, that initial body of work for the RevOps person, and probably somebody from IT, and probably somebody from marketing, maybe even a business analyst as well, are having to do a lot of massaging just to get that data set into a usable format. Because I'm definitely trained at board level to challenge the data as well. Certainly challenge the insights. That's the really interesting part, I think, James, is you've got the data set, but then what the really good RevOps people do is provide that more commercial or more strategic insight work, the analysis work on top of the data set, and that's where you can then make a fundamental difference to the quality of decision making at management level, because you're providing all this highly accurate leading indicator there,
which is, in today's world, is highly critical. Next year, 2026, is being seen as a growth year across almost every industry sector within SaaS. How could you help out some of the sales leaders who are looking to hire CROs who are hiring RevOps people right now? What characteristics? I think it can be quite easy to look for a skill set. What characteristics, and probably what key skill sets would we be looking for where you've seen the types of RevOps people that have been successful generating the type of information insight you just spoke about there?
So characteristics as opposed to sort of skill sets, and so I mean, I've alluded to it already a little bit in my description of this more sort of confident mindset, this a gravitas and maturity that you acquire with experience. And I totally accept that that's quite a difficult thing to test in a recruiting process, although we can talk about that too, because there definitely are ways. But I think this is where my answer would be slightly more nuanced, because I think when you're starting out with RevOps as a new role into your business, and to my previous point where you've probably got a bunch of data that needs bashing into shape before you can start drawing inferences from it. Actually, that person, I'm very comfortable that person can do the data reporting piece. Obviously, they're completely CRM literate and comfortable taking and interpreting forecasts from salespeople. Fine. I think as you move up the maturity curve, I think the RevOps characteristics change, or the desired RevOps characteristics change. And as I've mentioned, what I want to see in there is somebody who has a much wider business context. So, a way of phrasing that might be they're more strategic, but they're able to sort of pull up to that zoom out view, that helicopter view, and say, or make their analysis through the lens of the entire business. So not just sales and or marketing, but also the financial piece. I've seen really good RevOps people making highly useful interventions or contributions into pricing strategy. So that's looking at things like gross margin and cost of goods sold. And some of the more junior RevOps people won't even go there because it's RevOps, it's revenue. That's the only place we need to touch. And so that wider business context, that better understanding of the strategic importance of what they're doing and or the strategic context of the business at that moment in time. I think some of the RevOps people that I've worked with are a little bit siloed, which is odd because I think it's an alignment role, but they're very focused on sales data. Or some other people I work with are more marketing ops. So I think, again, a wider piece where you're looking across the whole GTM function. So that would, for me as well, include customer success and partners or channel if you have it too. Potentially as well, I would think as well, domain knowledge is if you're moving up as well. I think, and domain knowledge doesn't necessarily need to be industry sector, but it might be that particular sales motion that you employ in that business. But for me, it's an attitudinal thing, really, James. It's about having that confidence of standing up to somebody who may well be your line manager or your line manager's line manager, politely and respectfully telling them that they've reached the wrong conclusion and here's why. That's definitely the key characteristic I'm looking for, is that confidence.
So it is a relatively new role, as you mentioned at the start. What types of positions have you seen these candidates, particularly in the larger portfolios? What roles have they been doing in the past? Because they won't have grown up as a RevOps person. So where have you seen success where people have been doing other roles? Is it sales leaders moving into a RevOps position? Is it data engineers coming through? None of the above, all of the above?
No, I definitely have seen, because you're absolutely right that the people are moving in from different areas. I'm pretty sure I'm right when I say that in 2023, LinkedIn ranked head of RevOps as their fastest growing role on the platform. Everything, across all different roles, across all different geographies. So it's definitely an emerging and attractive role, and so therefore it is pulling in people from different functions. I tell you what I haven't seen, James. I haven't seen many salespeople move into it, which I think is quite an interesting topic on its own. Tells you something a little bit about how inured we've all become around CRM and the capturing and collection of data or the monitoring of data. So I've seen, what have I seen? So I think most commonly I've seen people who are interested in data. Say, data is a draw for them. So business analysts, I think. So, I mean, look, I know if I look at myself, I know I'd be absolutely god awful at it. because I just don't have that logical mindset that's able to sit and work with complex data inputs or data sets. So I think there's something there where you've got to have an interest and an attraction to that. I have actually seen a couple of leaders who pivoted. I think that's useful. I do like the idea of a RevOps person who has an understanding of what it must be like to carry a target, because you and I both know how difficult that is. And so I do like that. I don't think you necessarily have to have done the role before, but worked within or close to sales teams previously. It's a bit like that old adage on sort of football managers and football players, James. If you look at some of the greatest football managers, they were bang average or not very good players. The skill sets are different. So you don't need one to do the other, but I think you need to have had some affiliation with it or some exposure to it. So I definitely like that. One of the best RevOps people that I've ever worked with was an what I call sales coordinator, who was doing what would commonly be described as the admin tasks, administrative tasks in the team. But actually, when you're in that role, you're in the kernel of the operation, aren't you? You actually touch and feel everything, so you end up having quite a broad perspective on how the function operates. And she was absolutely brilliant when she eventually moved or migrated into that role. So again, I don't think it's a hard and fast answer. I think people can come from different areas, but I would say that empathy and understanding of the sales mentality and the sales role, and an attraction to unpicking and reassembling data sets, I think definitely is something that would be required.
The communication piece, I think, is critical, and being able to, the further up the tree that you can communicate what it is you found and what you're seeing in the right way, I think it makes the difference between the average and the super great RevOps that are out there. Before we move on, are there any sort of like key red flags that you've seen that stick out, to particularly, as I say, with a lot of sales leaders bringing these RevOps and people into the business, that they've perhaps either hired the wrong person or they're looking at the wrong things? It can be really, really hard to spot, because we know that most sales leaders may not be so hot on the data themselves, hence why we need these people in and around us. But is there anything that you could sort of like say that could help a sales leader spot that it might not be right, or what they're looking at, they're not looking at the right information, or something's not quite right?
With the candidate they're looking for, or the role more generally?
Probably once someone's in and they've got someone working in situ.
Well, I think I'm not quite sure if this is the answer that you were intending, but I've definitely seen CROs or commercial leaders bringing in RevOps functions for the first time and not really understanding why they're doing it or what the purpose of it would be. So I'm not saying they've been bullied into it, but certainly they'll have had people at board or people like me saying, hey, you've got RevOps, why have you not got RevOps? Oh, I better go and get RevOps, and then they'll speak to someone like you and bring it in. And I think perhaps the level of diligence there or forethought is not in play, because my worry there is that if you don't fully understand it, you don't really know why you're bringing that role into the business, is that you won't give it the proper level of support when it starts. And I don't think the RevOps person can be successful if you don't have that very, very early conversation about what it is that you're actually wanting them to do. Because RevOps covers a number of different, you've got strategy, you've got enablement, you've got insight, you've got tools and systems and data, you've got a whole plethora of different areas that it can cover. So what are the priority areas? What's the focus? Certainly in that initial 30, 60, 90, what do you want them to do? Because I worry that, perhaps speaking plainly, that the CRO is thinking, oh my God, data reporting is a mess and a nightmare. I'll bring in a RevOps person, they'll sort it, and you exit stage left and just lead them to it. That's not going to work. I mean, they'll make a difference, of course they will be. They're data-led people, they'll follow their nose, they'll start making improvements. But I think it's got to have not just the focus and the prioritization from the CRO, but also the support. Because I think if there's an established sales team and then suddenly this other person's coming in asking them tricky questions about their forecast, they'll be like, well, who are you? Are you above me? Are you a peer? Why do I have to? So it absolutely, it needs that engagement and it needs that support from commercial leadership from day -1. Actually, you should be leading up to the establishment of the role. You should be hugely positive and supportive of it. So it's not so much around the characteristics, James. It's more about the collaboration between the commercial leader, let's say it's a CRO, and the RevOps person, because I think that relationship has got to be super tight. Those two people have got to be working lockstep for the entire duration of the role in the business, but especially at the start.
Sales is becoming so tactical now the information insight that can come up at any point. If you are working closely, it's that 1%, isn't it, that you can find out. And it's going away from you hire RevOps, you hand them the laptop and say, there you go, sort out the data and come to me with the insight information. They need you to sit there and work through, what are we looking to do? What are we trying to find out? Why do you want to know that? Is that the right thing that's going to find the information for you? So totally get that. Moving on to the next topic. I know we could talk all day about RevOps. We're going to lean even more into the knowledge and experience that you've been getting doing all these due diligence on businesses and your coach and development of CROs. One of the big things that's being thrown around at the moment is that sales leaders and business as a whole are going, it's the grow at all costs is kind of out now. But what does that mean to a sales leader today? When it's like, say, right, grow at all costs is dead. Now it's about profitable growth. But what does that actually mean to a sales leader in seat today?
Got to do more with less. Yeah, I mean, in simple, plain English terms, you've got to be more efficient. You've got to do more with less. It's a really interesting one, this, because I'm live and work in the VC space and have done now for many years, and I'm not sure I've ever been in an investment or a board, an investment deal or a board meeting where anyone has actually said we're going to grow at all costs. What's actually the manifestation is that we've had some very punchy valuations. There's been a lot of VC money flying around, a lot of it as primary capital into sales and marketing operations. And so quite naturally, sales leaders and marketing leaders have been hiring lots of people. Essentially, that's what they've been doing. I have had some VCs saying, well, they're using our money to persuade people to buy their products, which is not sustainable. And I get it, but I think it definitely has been, whilst I've not ever heard anyone say growth at all costs, it's definitely been facilitated just by this influx of monies being made available to commercial leadership. So obviously there's been a whole host of headwinds, COVID, Brexit, Ukraine, over recent years. You don't need me to tell you about all of that. That's made a massive difference to confidence in the public markets. Valuations have plummeted, money's become more expensive. Investors have, it appears to management teams at least, investors have pivoted almost overnight from grow to capital efficiency. As I said, doing more with less. Interestingly, though, James, it's still very clear to me that if I look at all of the analysis that's available in the market at the moment, growth is still the number one value creating driver, even more so than profit. I mean, if you've got both, great. But growth is still what most acquirers and investors are looking for.
And when they say do more with less, is less just headcount? Less people, or is there what else is associated with it?
Yeah, great question. And I don't think it. I mean, I was going to say it shouldn't precipitate a lot of cost cutting, but it did, didn't it? I've heard recently, I don't know if you've got a different number, but 500,000 jobs worldwide in technology businesses, particularly the big tech outfits. They've been shipping people, haven't they, now for quite some time? And there's a flood of salespeople onto the market in recent years. I feel like I've met all of them actually. So yes, it has definitely meant some job losses. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's also been about building more sustainable or more scalable commercial engines. And what that means is that what it usually means is that the commercial leaders need to find ways in which they can deliver the same or even bigger numbers than they were doing previously, but in cleverer, more innovative ways. You can't just go out and hire a bunch of AEs and a bunch of SDRs and then expect them to drum up a huge quantum of pipeline and revenue. It's just not. Well, one, I don't think it'll work, but two, it's definitely not going to be signed off by the board. So I think that's really interesting because there's a couple of areas, really obvious areas, where that's meant that CROs now need to suit up. One, obviously, AI, and two, marketing. And I think that with the latter, because most CROs tend to be salespeople generally, it's rare that you find a marketer in that top role. And I know some, but it's rare. They're usually the highest performing sales leader who gets that role. They don't really understand marketing. In fact, they may even be like me, who's back in the 90s and 2000s. Marketing were a pain in the ass. They were constantly on your case about source codes and events and follow up and all that kind of stuff. So I think for a lot of CROs in recent years, they've had to re-educate themselves on the value of marketing because it is valuable. Because marketing is a variable cost. Typically, it's not a fixed cost. You can dial that up and dial that down depending on its effectiveness. So for me, as an investor and a board member, I think effective marketing is really, really attractive. So So finding a way to get your marketing operation working more efficiently, but certainly more effectively, that generates that interest, generates that awareness that your perhaps smaller but better sales team can then focus on delivering is key. And to that final point, I think that's the other thing that I've seen is a really welcome investment on sales enablement. And this is going to sound really trite, but it's true. Would you rather have 10 bang average salespeople or 3 superstars? Well, to me, it's obvious. It's absolutely obvious. And so using sales enablement and using better recruitment processes to hire in quality salespeople and then create an environment around them, whether it's training, whether it's collateral, whether it's playbooks, whether it's support, whatever it might be, then to get those people executing their sales professionalism or sales performance at a higher level I think is a good thing. Yes, it's less fixed cost and it's also more efficient and more effective sales operation.
Yeah, it does make total sense. Hire great people and ask them to do more, but give them the environment and the tools they're able to do more. I often, like you touched on the football analogy, but I kind of also put on the football analogy where coaching has gone, where you look at Pep and Klopp, they're now out running the coaching sessions day in, day out. And you look at the Alex Ferguson days, he brought people in that were specialists in different things. And I think now you're looking at, and we'll talk about the CRO role now, but you've now got a skill set where you have to be in there coaching and developing and moving these people forward rather than just hiring a huge amount of people and then trying to manage forecasts and budgets and deals through that. So just touching into that then on a CRO, particularly if we look at when somebody just joins a business, because I think it's easier to start there. Looking at the first 30, 90 days, but more importantly, when we were talking before, you mentioned about sales leaders need to be coming in and doing some diagnostics work. Just explain to our audience what you meant by that diagnostic work. So what should a sales leader, once they've made a decision to join a business, what should they be looking at and why?
Okay, so what I meant by that was that there will be, it won't be long, but there will be a period in which that revenue leader has got an opportunity, which they'll never get again, but an opportunity to be able to get the lie of the land. Different people, different businesses and different boards will do it differently, of course. But that could be anywhere from the first 30 days to the first 90 days. Such is the pressure now on revenue leaders to deliver their numbers. It probably isn't 90 days, it's probably just that first month. But most reasonable people sitting on boards will give those revenue leaders a bit of time to be able to make an appraisal, an objective appraisal as to what they've got in front of them. And I urge them to use that time, precious time, as well as possible, because, as I said, one, they won't get it again, but two, the compulsion, and I know because I've done it, the compulsion is just to dive straight into the deals. Because one, you think to yourself, well, that's an easy way to learn the people and learn the business. But two, also, salespeople have got big egos and they want to be a hero. Yeah. You know, you want to be able to get that monkey off your back, don't you? And if you can get it done in the first 3 weeks, that's brilliant. But I think it loses sight of why you were actually hired. I think the businesses that I work with don't want to hire sales superheroes. Yes, these people have to be able to sell. Yes, they have to have a demonstrable track record of selling. But they're there to build and drive a growing, scalable revenue operation. That means that you're almost certainly not going to be out finding and closing deals. Yes, you'll be getting involved in deals when they're big or they're tricky, of course you will. But that's not what you're there to do. Typically, your number one obligation is actually going to be around hiring. It's going to be around hiring and then enabling the team. So I'm not saying don't get stuck into the deals, but I'm just saying in that first period, I think there's an opportunity for you to look at 3 areas that will enable you then to understand what's the quality of resources you have available to yourself at that moment in time, and then make an ask of the seniors in the business about what needs to be improved. And those areas would be, you can call them different things, but for me it's the proposition. So it's the product or service that you're selling, and that includes the pricing strategy, that includes the marketing communication program, how we're communicating that to our target markets. It's the processes, so the business systems, the technical stack that you have in place to underpin the flow of opportunities. It moves its way through your business and how you then report that back up. And then finally, and without doubt, most importantly, the people. So do I have the right people? Do I have enough people? Are they in the right roles? Are there skills gaps? Are there experiential gaps? Are there attitudinal deficiencies? Have I got people in my network I know could do a better job? Are they properly remunerated, trained? Are they properly managed? And so on and so on and so on. But so proposition, process and people, Again, you can rebadge them if you want, but those 3 areas in the first sort of 30 days, so what's that, 20 odd working days, you've got that opportunity to be ruthlessly objective about what you've got, what you haven't got, and what you need now to be able to deliver the plan that you've just signed up to. So take that time and use it wisely.
And when we were talking, you were quite clear in saying that the sales leader needs to know how much time they've got to carry that out and be signposting that with the board. Why is that a critical part of this?
So it was a bit of a pin drop moment for me a few years ago when we were recruiting a super smart revenue leader. And as we were coming to the end of the recruitment process, he asked a really profound question. He's like, I want to know. The business was underperforming, which is usually the case, isn't it, when you're bringing in a new revenue lead? Not always, but usually. And he said, I want to ask you, can you tell me, when does all of this become my fault? I thought was a really interesting question, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks because it forced us to think about, well, how long are we giving them? How long are we giving them before we're saying this is on your watch and you're now accountable for it? And I think from memory, we gave him a number, we gave him a time frame. And I'm not saying it made it bulletproof, it didn't at all, but it gave him that grace period to be able to do his analysis, to build out his understanding and not be rushed into the decision making. And again, look, there's no one size fits all answer here, but I think it's a really interesting question for boards to ask themselves, and I think for revenue leaders to ask of the boards that are recruiting them, because it then allows you to frame that initial period into, whether it's more strategic analysis work or whether we're straight into execution. And by the way, checking in on that at a regular clip over those first couple of quarters is also really important. But I had this conversation earlier today, actually, James, and we've got one outgoing sales leader with another one coming in. They've worked out a plan where the first forecast, so the first month's forecast, will be the outgoing CRO. The second month forecast will be them both, and then the third forecast will be the new CRO on their own. So maybe if you've got a quarterly rhythm, you might do it on a slide. But again, there's a real life example of how the team has said, right, this is how we're going to sort of migrate responsibility and accountability, if you like, over time. Maybe it's a bit like a ramp period for a new AE. Which point do you get to 100% target? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? And I think a lot of that depends on sales motions and sales cycles and deal sizes.
And this probably helps us segue nicely into how to communicate with the board, not just on you've got this diagnosis process going on, but more and more I'm hearing that the communication between the in-seat sales leader and the board may not be as good as it could be. And you've spoken about there being no surprises when we had the board meeting. So how does a sales leader eliminate surprises without the fear of them feeling like they are letting them know they're not doing their job?
Yeah, with great difficulty. And I think this is a really tough part of the role, especially if your key strength is in leading and managing sales teams, opening and closing deals. That's been your skill set for years and years, and then suddenly you're into a board investor dynamic where certainly the scale-ups I work in, the investors are very involved, very proactive. You'll see them in and around the business, and suddenly you've got to manage that. You've got to manage that new relationship. But there's no doubt in my mind that new dynamic, that direct line between you and, say, maybe the chair or a non-exec or an investor, does carry some risk. It does. I think I said to you when we last spoke, to me, every interaction that you have with an investor as a sales leader or revenue leader is an interview. There is a constant judgment cycle going on. I've been in boards, where people have said, "Oh well, I ran into Fred recently, and he didn't feel very confident about Q3." And then you come to the board, and Fred's very confident about Q3, and then you've got this dissonance, and people pick at it. And so it is. You have to be on guard. I certainly would recommend to any revenue leader that if you do have interactions with board members or investors, that you make sure that your CFO and your CEO are apprised, so that you're joined up. You don't. I mean, again, I've had this to me, where, and I've probably done it to CEOs. I've run into the sales leader and he said this, and that's the first that they've heard of it. You don't want that. Making sure that your peer colleagues, your management colleagues, are fully aware of any interactions and conversations that you've had with investors and board members, I think is very important. Number one rule: don't blag, or in slightly fruity language, don't bullshit. Just if in doubt, tell the truth. You don't need to tell the whole truth, James. I think one of the things that I definitely recognise in myself is that if you give me loads of data, I'll just ask for more. Questions precipitates questions or more questions. So you might not want to give the whole piece. But two other things that I would add. One is that the no surprises at board meeting is critical. So if you're landing very, very bad and also on occasion good news, you should probably do that outside of the board or before the board, either through an email or through a phone call or whatever it might be, and just make sure that people are aware, give them an opportunity to vent their frustration, ask some difficult questions, so that the board is not consumed by that conversation. So definitely, my old chairman used to say, bad news early is good news, because it gives me a chance to do something about it. Is the principle. And absolutely. Not ambushing people, not coming to these board meetings. I've done the opposite, by the way, as well. Where I've come in and landed a whole bit of good news, and it's completely killed the forecast. And people just feel, sometimes it gives them the impression that you're not in control because the information is being delivered in that way.
Because I think it's really important to look at process rather than results, because results don't necessarily always tell you the full picture. Do you recommend a weekly or bi-weekly email that if there's a particular topic that is not going according to plan that you're looking at, that you should be giving the board regular updates to, so they just know everything that is going on throughout the process? Or is that overkill?
Yeah, I think it can be overkill, actually. And as I said, I'm being genuine here. I think the more information you give boards, the more they'll want. Again, I'm making a generalisation, but I think it's broadly true. So, look, there are going to be situations where the business is on, amber or red, and so maybe it's a cash thing. Maybe you do need a weekly update. But I think for most boards, a monthly or even quarterly rhythm, it should be fine. It's just, I think what I'm talking about is those sort of, it's a bit of common sense here, James. If something really good or something really bad has happened, that information, say, would materially affect the plan or the forecasting of the plan, then I do think that's information that should be shared early. One of the things that I certainly say to the CROs that I work with is, often you get people like me who are advisors, senior advisors, or operating partners. You can communicate through us. In fact, the other thing I was going to say to the previous question was that you can also say to these people, whether they're non-execs or whether they're operating partners, look, if there's information that you're not quite ready to share with board yet, just say, this is off the record for the moment. I'm sharing it with you because I want your view, I want your perspective, I want your input, but I'm not ready for that wider circulation or wider distribution to the rest of the board. So say that, before you actually share whatever the information is. Look, I just need to keep this between us for the moment. And I think by and large most people can be trusted in that respect. And again, also, if there are issues, I've had one very recently actually where we've had a situation with a board not being particularly impressed with an individual, and or an individual in the downline of the CRO, and I said, look, don't sit at home agonising about it. Call them, call the person who's expressed the frustration or the criticism, and deal with it head to head. It might even be that the best thing to do, I definitely have this with a few of my businesses, James, is that I've got regular catch-ups. By regular, I don't mean every week. I mean every month or two, or maybe once a quarter, we'll sit down for a couple of hours and chew through the bigger issues, rather than getting consumed in the day-to-day detail of a particular deal that's gone wrong, or an individual who, maybe has lost their mojo that month, whatever it might be. You're looking at it through the right lens, the right lens for that investor or board CRO dynamic. But anyway, look, there's a number of different ways of tackling it. But bad news early is good news. Don't blag.
And before we move on to people in recruitment, which is a pretty critical topic, how important is it for the sales leader to be building relationships with the board, but more in particular, building them with someone like yourself, who's there to support, guide, got a huge amount of go-to-market experience? How much would you allow a sales leader to lean on you as a sounding board and fill in information to you? Maybe even sometimes the information to the investor whispered in the ear by you might be better than the sales leader. So how is it important that the sales leader puts his arms out as much as possible to build a relationship with you and bring you on board? And in your position, how open are you to that happening?
So I'm completely open to it. So I say to people that I will be within reason. I'd be happy to spend as much time with you as you want. But there's some caveats here, James. I think one is, as an advisor or an operating partner, you're not. It's not an execution role. So you're not accountable, you're not responsible, you shouldn't be doing the job for them. It's a consultancy position, you're listening to the issue or the challenge, and you're providing your advice and guidance, and then ultimately the CRO decides how they want to, or if they want to act on that advice. So I make myself open. For the people that I coach formally at the moment, we get together once a month, and we have at least 2 or 3 hours, sometimes more, discussion with the agenda set by them. Has to be. It's the stuff that they're dealing with, the stuff that they're confronting that tends to form or should form the content. But I also say to these people, I'm available 24/7. So usually over WhatsApp, if you need me, message me, we'll find a time that day to talk, because there might be something burning that they need to deal with. So you're available face to face at least once a month. Again, you can change that frequency depending on circumstance, but you're available all of the time. You make a really good point about me being a conduit for information. Definitely, sometimes I can say, look, I can probably do you want me to just surface this or float this with the rest of the board? Because it might just be a little bit easier if I do it. So that's definitely the case, and sometimes we'll connive between us about the drip feeding of that information back into the board. But my other caveat on here, James, is that whatever you're doing in here as a revenue leader, whatever relationship you're fashioning with an advisor or an operating partner or a non-exec, make sure that the CEO is fully on board with this. You can't just be going off the reservation and having board level conversations or coaching conversations with non-execs without the CEO, having said, yeah, fine, I'm happy. In fact, the best way of doing it, and the way that I do it, is I get the business to pay for the coaching that I do, the formal coaching, and it's through a statement of work that I get the CEO to input into and sign off. So there's a formalization to it. There's an agreement that the business is supportive of this, and then what I tend to do is every sort of quarter or so I'll check in with the CEO just at a high level to say, look, this is what we've been talking about in the coaching session. Don't share anything, again, with that caveat that it's off the record, but generally this is how I think we're moving, this is the progress we're making, this is the areas that I'm worried about, and therefore the CEO has some agency in that relationship.
Amazing. Great talking about that. We're going to move on to people and recruitment.
Okay.
We did say that we would touch on your view of the player coach before we dived into that. So particularly as there will be lots of hiring, we're seeing there's lots of hiring going on, and some businesses will be thinking about a player coach role. What's your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts on this? I mean, I'll put it out there, I am not a fan. I'm not a fan. I've only seen it work once really well, and that was Kenny Dalglish back in the late 80s, and even then he wasn't playing every game. Why do I say this? So first of all, I completely understand why businesses do it. I completely understand. There's a couple of good reasons. One is that, as we said before in a previous exchange, sometimes it's a really good way of understanding or learning about deal dynamics and company detail by having your own target or having your own set of accounts or running your own patch, whatever it might be. I think also for a lot of first-time sales leaders, there's a bit of a nice sort of comfort blanket there, isn't it? That you're still actually out doing deals, which most of us love doing. It's almost like earning your spurs by proving that you've closed a couple of deals in your new business. And I think also with boards and businesses, I think they can see it as just a more efficient way of having both a manager and a salesperson, because you're only paying once. So I get it. I do understand why it is attractive to businesses, but I just think for two fundamental reasons it's not right. One is, as we've already discussed, I think the qualities of a highly effective or high-performing sales leader and a high-performing salesperson, I think, are different. I just do, and I'm happy to talk about that. And then the second part is, I think that actually when you're doing the role, playing and managing that hybrid role, I think it can also be conflicting actually in the day-to-day, and I've definitely seen that. So I've been into the DD into businesses where they've got player managers, and salespeople are saying to me, well, he's not here, or she's not available, because I don't get the coaching, I don't get the oversight, I don't get the inputs, because they're off doing their own deal, because target is everything. And guess what? Their commission plan for their target and their commission plan for their override are very, very different. So why wouldn't you go after the one that's going to pay you more? And so I just think from a skill set and a conflict potential perspective, it just doesn't feel right. It definitely can be done for a period. Yeah, I'm not going to say here what I think that period is, because it will be different every time. So I think on an interim basis, it is perfectly reasonable and acceptable. But I think as a long-term setup, I just don't get it. I just think they're different roles. I really do.
I think you hit the nail on the head for me when I'm talking to businesses about it. And this scenario plays out in everything that you're looking at, but in particularly salespeople. They are normally, and people like to admit it less now, but I speak to salespeople every day. They are financially motivated and they will behave where they're likely to make the most money. So therefore, if you want someone to hit a number and grow the business, it's not going to be that top salesperson because they will go after the big deals and that takes time because that's their natural behavior to do. And you can't change a characteristic. You can look at skill sets and you can learn something new. But one of the biggest drivers on a salesperson is financial gain, and they will go to that behavior. So yeah, I'm totally with you. There are reasons why people may need to go to it, and that's fine. But I think as an overall set, you should be looking at what you're trying to achieve, what good looks like, what bad looks like over 12 months, and then hire the right people to help you achieve that.
I've been in conversations with CEOs where they've said, that when we're talking about recruiting a sales leader, and they'll say, well, obviously the number one skill set here is that they're an amazing salesperson. And I will deliberately stop and say, no, it isn't. You want them to be an amazing hirer, an amazing leader, an amazing manager. You want somebody who can find people, great people, bring them in, and then coach and nurture a performance out of them. And honestly, I've gone toe to toe with people on this before because obviously you do need the sales skill set. You clearly do. You need to have grown up in that environment. But I know from my own experience that when I was on the road, I was all right. I certainly wasn't the guy at the top of the league table. I wasn't the best. I wasn't the worst. I did my numbers, but there were far better salespeople than me out in my team, or the teams that I worked in. But it was only when I then got into sales management that I realised that there was a completely different requirement needed of me, and actually the skill set or the experience set that I had at that point was much better suited. But I've just done it so many times, James. I've just made that easy decision of promoting the best performing salesperson in the team, and you give yourself two problems. One is you put that person into the role and they're not equipped to do it, and two, you've lost your best salesperson.
Yeah. And maybe we should do a separate podcast, because when you sit down and you talk about the skills and characteristics of that A player, I don't really like putting that type, but when you look at it and you say that, and then you put what are the skill sets of the successful sales leaders, the characteristics are quite different. There are some obviously synergies in and around it, but there are some key differences in just the character around it. But then we're talking about recruitment. One of the areas that I see, and hiring is a massive challenge, getting hiring right. There's all sorts of pressure, particularly now we're talking about we're going to have less salespeople we can go out and hire. So now it's even more important to get hiring right. I don't see enough of scorecards. I'm surprised more often when I take on opportunities and learn, what's the hiring process? There's no scorecard involved. And there's still a lot of, the best way I can describe it is gut feel, but I don't want to play people down on it, but there is a lot of gut feel going on to it. Walk me through your process of what a good interview process looks like. Where does it start? Who's involved in it to give them the best chance? I know there's no bulletproof, but to give them the best chance of hiring someone that stands a good chance of being successful.
Yeah, well, look, there are a variety of different methods, clearly, and again, I don't think one stands above any other. In fact, what I've tended to do over the years is sort of accrue all of the different techniques that I like and bundle them into one process. Sometimes you're limited, James. Sometimes you're limited by budget. Sometimes you're limited by time. Sometimes you're working with an established recruitment process that HR. It's not always easy to break that down and rebuild it back up. But if I'm coming into it cold, what I tend to start with is what you've just said, that premise, which is that recruiting on conventional interviewing and you wanted to call it gut feel. I'll call it gut feel. I think it is. I think it's kind of instinctive, and I think there's a lot of research out there, isn't there, that talks about conventional interviewing just being an absolute. It's just pure luck if you find the right person. In fact, I think I saw research from years ago actually that somebody done in the States saying that you're just as likely to recruit somebody or successfully recruit somebody based on their random selection of star sign than you are on conventional interviewing, because it's just so fraught with risk. So what I've tried to do is over the years is try to eliminate much of that as much of that risk as possible. And again, just one more point here, I still make mistakes. It's still following a very detailed, rigorous, comprehensive recruitment process. You still get it wrong. So this isn't about the 100% elimination of all recruitment risk. I don't think that's yet possible. That's why I'm such a big fan of fractionals actually at the moment, because it gives you that sort of suck it and see option. But yeah, it's about removing as much of that as possible. So what do? Well, look, the first thing I would say, and this is perhaps one of the biggest battles that I've had internally with myself over the years, I'm better at it now, is engagement and ownership of the hiring manager. You know, when I was in roles where we were recruiting a lot of people, so a lot of people all of the time, James, I'm going to be really honest with you. When I saw the interviews being populated in my diary by HR, my thought process was more interviews. It's taking me away from the day job, which is working with my people, coaching my people, closing deals. You know, so I saw it as an imposition. I saw it as an overhead. And I had an experience just over 10 years ago with a very forthright recruiter, a guy called Darren Peck, who, when I criticised him for the quality of the candidates that he was giving me, he just turned it on top and said, well, let me take you through the piss poor briefing process that you've given. You know, the brief you give me is awful. I set these interviews up for you. You're late, you're distracted, or you haven't even read the CVs, and you're criticising me. And I was like, okay, I need to turn the light inwards here. And the advice that he was giving me was, look, if you're going to recruit somebody, if you're going to pay me 20-30% to find somebody for you, get engaged. You know, be involved. Do your prep, do your homework, look at the LinkedIn profiles, do some candidate checking where you can through your own LinkedIn contacts. Make sure you sit down and go through the brief in detail with the recruiter who's got the mandate. Revise it if necessary as you start to meet candidates. To your point, make sure that when you're doing the long list interviews that you've got a proper scorecard or at least some evaluation criteria that you can then have a more objective measure of different candidates. So a couple of the businesses that I work with are using the loop interviewing technique that the Amazon guys started, which I think is super cool, because you've got 5, 6, 7 more people interviewing different elements of the characteristics of the role, but they're doing it independently. So there's no one loud voice in the room together. And so I like that. I like the idea of having multiple interviewers. It's a bit more punchy. It's a bit more objective. Use the other tools that are available in modern recruiting. Like, I'm not saying psychometrics are perfect. I'm not saying they can't be gamed. They absolutely can. But it's another input that allows you to help build out your assessment. And assessment centres actually was the other point to make, which is, not just interviewing, James, actually give them a task. Sales officer for one of the businesses that we looked at recently, we gave them raw data from the CRM and said, look, we want your analysis, your interpretation of the forecast. What's the pipeline telling you? We didn't give them any more information than that, but they had to go away and do their own piece of homework and then represent it to us. So look, I think there are a variety of different things and tools that you can apply. There's definitely some very good new AI recruiting tools as well that I would include. Proper candidate screening, proper reference checking, assessment tools, psychometrics, loop interviewing, hard scorecards. All of this stuff should be considered where it's possible. But if you're using a recruiter or you're going through HR, make sure that you support them with a proper brief. Get involved, be engaged, own the process, do your homework, turn up to interviews properly prepared.
Great stuff there. And I'm going to pick a few bits out from it. Being on the side of the recruiter, I believe it's super important. There's been really basic to it. There are 2 pools of candidates that you'll recruit from, unemployed and employed. Most leaders will want to go to the employed route or that passive candidate, and they get interviewed by HR as a first stage process to see if they've got the credentials for it. My feeling is that it should be the hiring manager that does that first stage, in today's world, does that first stage interview and turns curiosity into genuine interest. And I feel that is largely best done by the sales team. What's your thought process on that? What have you seen work and not work at that first stage interview to really get the interest from those passive candidates?
So I recognise what you're saying. I think again there's some nuance here, because there are some outstanding HR leaders who work hand in glove with their sales colleagues who are able to do that first interview. And I think it's not also about checking credentials, James. I think it's also about cultural fit. And the HR guys can often make that initial assessment more quickly. So I'm not, what I guess I'm saying is I'm not completely averse to it. If time allows, yes, ideally, I think the hiring manager should be doing the long list. should be doing those initial interviewing.
Do you think you need to, particularly with passive candidates, be assessing cultural fit on the first call?
Well, I think cultural fit is an assessment that we're made throughout the interviewing process, the whole recruitment process. I don't think it stops or starts in any one call. But I think, look, I would value HR's perspective, whether it's on the first call, the third call, or the final call, I don't know. But I'm definitely interested in understanding what their view is, because they're going to be working with them too. Should it be the sort of initial arbiter of whether a candidate makes it through or not? I don't know. But if you've got a decent working relationship with your HR colleagues, I do think most of the risk can be ironed out there. I think the point you're making, though, is a slightly different one, which is, would they have the ability to get a passive candidate excited about the opportunity and the role? And I think to that extent, you might be right. That probably will be best served by having somebody like the hiring manager, like the revenue leader themselves. I think the challenge we've got, so I think some of the CROs that I coach are recruiting a lot of people all the time, and they might tell you that doing long list interviewing, those initial candidate screening, is practically not possible. And that's why one of the reasons why, James, I'm advocating loop interviewing, where you're bringing in multiple members from different parts of the business. So I'm recruiting, so we're recruiting a CRO in one of my businesses at the moment. We're having people who will be reporting to that person in the process. So that we're also getting their view, because they're the person who, they're the guys who can be taking direction from them. So broaden it out maybe, and maybe your number two can do some of those or share some of those initial interviews.
I think getting those types of people to do the interviews it can be really amazing, because it works really well in the military, right? Officers go in and they are trained by the people that will eventually report into them in the military. So I think it gives you an idea of how they're going to interact with those people. We're coming to the end. One of the really critical parts of recruitment that I wanted to make sure that we bring up on this is because hiring happens, particularly salespeople. Hiring will happen because at the end of the year, the forecasting for next year is greater than the capability of the headcount that we have, and we'll need to hire more people in play. But during the year, there will be largely, if we, this is brushing everybody with the same brush, you shouldn't, but there'll be a sacking because somebody hasn't performed. And I always say you need to be ready for that surprised resignation, like the one that you thought would never happen. How should sales leaders be doing recruitment? How often should they be interviewing people, or do you just wait until there's a need?
Easy answer, this one. Never stop recruiting. I think people are bored of hearing me say it. I say it so often. I believe it's incumbent on a revenue leader in a growing operation to constantly be out looking for talent. Now look, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have mandates in the market. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be constantly going back to financial offers. But I think that for a number of really good reasons, it makes sense for you to have a current perspective on what's available out there. And I like to think, when I've been in really high performing businesses, high performing sales operations, I'm always thinking about how can I upgrade, how can I improve the quality of people that I've got on my team. Now you can do that in-house, can't you? You can do that with the resources you've got through coaching and enablement and other things, but you can also be thinking about bringing in better quality people who will lift standards in yourself and around them. And the only way you can do that is by making sure that you've got a finger on the pulse. What I've tended to do with the businesses is make sure that if we've got an HR or recruitment page on our website or on LinkedIn, it's fluid. Or if you're a BD person or an AE person or an SE, come and talk to us. We'd be happy to talk to you. If you've got a retained relationship with the recruiter, negotiating something there that allows them to be funneling CVs into you without a huge cost, particularly from competitors or within the domain that you're operating, and having those meetings regularly. And they don't even have to be interviews, James. They can be an interactive call like this, or a coffee, or whatever it might be. And then so yes, one, the advantage is, one, yes, you're understanding where the skill set and qualities of your current team sit against the market. But also, as you say, when something goes south, as it always does, you're kind of ready, because you met Jane 3 months ago. She wasn't ready then. She might be ready now, but you thought she was a great fit, and you're in position then to be. And again, we've had this in one of our businesses, one of the frog businesses, very recently. And you're ready to go. You can move super quickly. I Whether it's with HR, whether it's with your mandated recruiter or retained recruiter, I would encourage all revenue leaders to constantly be appraising new talent out in the marketplace, definitely.
And because I know sales leaders, and rightly so, they'll talk about how busy their time is, but how much time in a week would you say, percentage wise, should they put this? Because we're not asking them to meet people every week, but it'll be reaching out on all the different tools there are to connect to people, drop them a message, and then do the odd meeting. But to structure into their week, how much time should they spend on this? So I think it's important.
Well, you can't, as I would, sit here and say that the number one skill set for a revenue leader is to hire brilliantly and manage and drive teams. And I genuinely believe that to be the case. You can't say, well, it shouldn't be a constituent part of their working week. But again, I'm not going to be prescriptive here. I think actually week in, week out, the majority of your time is dedicated to coaching your team, whether professional form works for you and them. But I would say it's got to be part of your working week. And I think there's sort of hard and soft plays here, James. So some of it will be meeting potential people. Yes, I appreciate that's a time constraint. So you might be want to do one of those a week, or maybe two of those a week. But there's some soft stuff that you should be doing as well. So, for example, making sure that the recruiters are properly beefed, or the LinkedIn messages that are coming out for the company and from your team, the one that are talking about a fast-growing environment where people can be highly remunerated and rewarded and recognised and the rest of it. So you're creating that impression out in the marketplace that this is a fantastic place to work, and your own networking as well, making sure that the people in the movers and shakers in your market are aware that you're interested in speaking to new people. So there's some sort of softer stuff that you're going to be doing probably organically, but you just need to tweak it a little bit. That on its own will make a difference. But yeah, it's got to be part of your working week. I'm not sure exactly what the prescribed amount of time should be, but if you're meeting a handful of candidates properly every month, then I would probably be pretty confident.
Awesome. James, we've already overrun, so I appreciate you continuing to deliver the insight to us. But thank you so much for everything that you've done for this, like the calls we've had beforehand, and for joining us on the show and just giving us a small bit of insight to the journey and career that you've had.
Not at all. You're more than welcome. I love doing these kind of things. I think I've said to you before, James, that when I was doing the role, when I was a revenue leader, I just wish that we'd had these kind of facilities available to us, whether it's through podcasts or whether it's through advisors or communities like Pavilion and Winning by Design and the rest of it. That would have been so useful to have an extra input, an extra or advice that I could have called on or leaned on. It would have been incredibly useful, because it is a really lonely role, and I think now in 2025 there's a lot more out there like what you're doing here to help provide more of a support network for revenue leaders. So I'm delighted to be involved. Thank you.